Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hacker News Daily podcast. I'm your host, and today we're diving into yesterday's top stories that had the tech community absolutely buzzing. We reviewed 30 stories from Hacker News, and let me tell you, the 5 that rose to the top paint a fascinating picture of where tech is heading right now. We've got developer frustrations boiling over with Next.js, Google dodging the biggest tech breakup since Microsoft, and Anthropic raising an absolutely mind-boggling amount of money that has people questioning if we're in an AI bubble. Plus, we'll look at how developers are bringing premium visual effects to the web and wrap up with the reality check on AI coding assistants that's dividing the developer community. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into what had everyone talking yesterday on Hacker News. All right, so our first story is generating some serious heat in the developer community. Next.js is infuriating. And with nearly 1,000 points and over 550 comments on Hacker News, this one clearly struck a nerve. So here's what happened. A developer basically reached their breaking point with Next.js after discovering something that should be simple. Production logging is apparently nearly impossible to do properly. And think about this for a second. They had an issue in production. And get this, they couldn't debug it because Next.js only enables default logging during development, not in production, where, actual problems happen that affect real users. The author's frustration really comes through when they dig into the middleware situation. Now, if you've worked with Express or really any traditional web framework from the last decade, you know middleware is supposed to be this elegant way to chain together functionality, authentication, logging, error handling, whatever you need. But in Next.js, you can only pass 4 parameters through middleware, and only the headers actually affect anything downstream. That's kind of wild when you think about it. What really got me about this post is the author's disbelief. They literally ask, how do you fuck this up so bad? Because we've had this figured out since Express came around in the early 2010s. It's like Next.js looked at all these solved problems in web development and said, now let's make this complicated again. Now, the Hacker News discussion on this is fascinating because it's not just one person venting, it's this avalanche of developers sharing similar frustrations. The big theme that keeps coming up is this excessive abstraction problem. People are saying they can't figure out where their code is actually running anymore. Is it on the edge? Is it on the server? Is it on the client? And when something breaks, good luck figuring out which layer is causing the problem. There's this interesting defense from one commenter who argues that people are misunderstanding what Next.js calls middleware, that it's actually an edge function with specific constraints, not traditional middleware like middleware has worked for over a decade. But even if that's technically correct, isn't that part of the problem? When you name something middleware but it doesn't work like middleware has worked for over a decade, you're setting developers up for confusion. What's particularly telling is that Guillermo Raut, the CEO of Vercel, the company behind Next.js, actually showed up in the comments to acknowledge these issues. He mentions they've made recent improvements, but the fact that the CEO had to jump in speaks volumes about how serious these complaints are. The vendor lock-in concern is another big one. Several developers pointed out that Next.js seems designed to push you toward Vercel's hosting platform. Want to deploy somewhere else? Well, prepare for a world of pain trying to figure out which features will actually work outside of Vercel's infrastructure. You know what really stands out to me here? This feels like a classic case of over-engineering. Next.js is trying to be this magical framework that unifies server and client code, handles static generation and server-side rendering, manages your API routes, but in trying to do everything, it's made simple things incredibly complex. One commenter mentioned they'd rather have explicit separation between server and client code, even if it means writing a bit more boilerplate, just so they can understand what's actually happening. The sentiment in the discussion is pretty stark. Multiple developers saying they'll actively avoid Next.js in future projects. When you have people with years of experience saying things like, I've never been more frustrated with a framework, that's not just a learning curve issue. That's a fundamental design problem. And here's the thing. Next.js has incredible marketing. Their documentation looks beautiful, the promises sound amazing, but the reality of actually building and maintaining a production application with it seems to be a very different story. It's almost like they optimized for the getting started experience and forgot about the oh shit, something's broken in production experience. Speaking of companies dealing with complexity and criticism, let's shift from developer frameworks to something that affects the entire internet. Story 2. Google can keep its Chrome browser, but will be barred from exclusive contracts. And wow, the Hacker News crowd is having a field day with this one, over 800 points and nearly 600 comments. So here's what happened. Remember last year when Google was found guilty of illegally monopolizing internet search? Well, everyone was waiting to see if the DOJ would actually force them to sell off Chrome or Android. That decision just came down from Judge Amit Mehta, and Google basically walked away with a slap on the wrist. They get to keep everything, Chrome, Android, the whole shebang. They just can't make exclusive contracts anymore. The judge actually said the DOJ overreached in asking for the breakup. His exact words were that Google didn't use Chrome and Android to affect any illegal restraints. And you know what? Alphabet's stock jumped 8% in after-hours trading. 8%. That tells you everything about how investors saw this ruling. They were terrified of a real breakup, and this is nothing by comparison. But here's where it gets interesting. What does no exclusive contracts actually mean? Because Google pays Apple something like $20 billion a year, yeah, billion with a B, just to be the default search engine on iPhones. Is that deal dead now? Can they still pay to be the default as long as users can change it? The ruling's pretty vague on this, and the Hacker News discussion is all over the place trying to figure it out. One commenter, Fitwadrone, called this an astonishing victory for Google. And honestly, they're not wrong. Think about it. You get found guilty of running an illegal monopoly, and your punishment is basically don't sign certain types of contracts anymore. Meanwhile, you keep all the products that made you dominant in the first place. It's like getting convicted of robbing a bank, but the judge lets you keep the money as long as you promise not to use that specific getaway car again. Now, there's another perspective here that's worth considering. Some folks are arguing that Chrome succeeded on merit, not because of monopolistic practices. They point out that Chrome was genuinely better than Internet Explorer when it launched, faster than Firefox. But come on, once you control the browser, the search engine, the ads platform, and the web standards through your influence on Chromium, that's not just competing on merit anymore. That's using every lever you've got to maintain dominance. What really gets me is this disconnect between the verdict and the remedy. Bryn Barn made this great point in the comments. They said selective restrictions on monopolists just don't work. You can't tell a monopoly, okay, keep being a monopoly, but be nice about it. Their argument is you either break them up into pieces or you accept that they'll find ways around whatever restrictions you put in place. In looking at tech history, they might have a point. The Apple situation is particularly fascinating here. If Google can't pay for exclusive placement anymore, what happens? Does Apple finally build its own search engine? They've got the talent, the resources. Or does Microsoft swoop in with Bing? Can you imagine Bing being the default on iPhones? The mind boggles. And let's not forget about Firefox. Mozilla gets hundreds of millions from Google for default search placement. If that money dries up, Firefox is already struggling with market share. This could be existential for them, though some commenters are pointing out that maybe the ruling only applies to actual exclusive contracts, where Google prevents others from even bidding, not just paying to be the default. The timing of all this is wild, too. We're in the middle of the AI revolution, search is being completely reimagined with ChatGPT and others, and here's Google getting a ruling that basically preserves the status quo. They keep their integrated ecosystem right when that integration might matter most for competing in AI. You know what this really reminds me of? The Microsoft antitrust case from the late 90s. They were found guilty, there was talk of breaking them up, and then basically nothing happened. A few behavioral remedies, some oversight, but Microsoft kept Windows, kept Office, kept everything that mattered. And now, 25 years later, they're one of the most valuable companies in the world. This ruling feels like déjà vu all over again. Big tech company does anti-competitive stuff, gets caught, goes through this whole legal drama, and then walks away largely intact. The more things change, right? The community reaction is just fascinating to watch unfold. You've got people genuinely confused about what this means practically, others angry that it's not enough, some relieved that the government isn't breaking up successful companies. It's like watching three different arguments happening simultaneously, and they're all kind of right in their own way. And speaking of companies with massive resources competing in the AI space, wait until you hear about the absolutely astronomical amount of money flowing into this next company. Anthropic raises $13 billion Series F. So, moving into what might be the most jaw-dropping funding story we've seen in tech, Anthropic just raised $13 billion in their Series F round. Yeah, you heard that right. 13 with a B. And here's where it gets even wilder. This values the company at $183 billion post-money, which, that's bigger than most countries' GDP, folks. Now, what really caught my eye about this story isn't just the sheer size of the numbers, though those are absolutely staggering. It's the revenue growth that's supposedly backing this up. According to the reports, Anthropic went from a $1 billion run rate at the beginning of 2025 to over $5 billion just 8 months later. That's not just growth, that's basically teleportation up the revenue chart. Even in the AI gold rush we're living through, growing 5x in 8 months it's almost incomprehensible. The investor list reads like a who's who of global capital. Iconic leading with sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, traditional asset managers all piling in. It's like everyone with serious money suddenly decided they absolutely had to own a piece of the AI future, and Anthropic became their vehicle of choice. But here's where the hacker news community really started digging in, and honestly, they raised some fascinating points. There's this growing concern about what people are calling the compute moat problem. Basically, we've reached a point where you need country-level funding just to stay competitive in the AI race. Think about it. GPT-4 reportedly cost around $100 million to train, and people are already talking about future models costing over $1 billion just for the training runs. That's before you even start serving a single customer request. The discussion got really heated around whether this business model even makes sense long-term. Sure, Anthropic is pulling in billions in revenue, but when your compute costs are astronomical and growing exponentially, when exactly do you hit profitability? Some commenters pointed out that even with 60% gross margins, which would be fantastic for most businesses, the infrastructure requirements are so massive that it's creating this weird dynamic where only the absolute wealthiest players can even compete. One particularly insightful comment compared this to a race to the bottom, where companies are burning through ungodly amounts of capital, trying to build slightly better models that, let's be honest, are starting to feel pretty similar to each other. Claude, GPT-4, Gemini, they're all impressive, but are the differences worth hundreds of billions in valuation gaps?
There was this interesting counter-argument, though. Some folks defended the valuation by pointing out that at 20x revenue, it's actually not that crazy compared to other tech acquisitions. Someone brought up YouTube selling for $1.65 billion back in 2006 when it had basically no revenue. And look how that turned out for Google. Maybe we're just bad at pricing transformative technology early on. But then there's this weird detail that several people caught. The article seems to be dated September 2025, which, unless someone has a time machine they're not telling us about, raises some questions. Is this leaked information about a planned round, a hypothetical scenario, or just someone getting their dates mixed up? It adds this whole layer of uncertainty to an already mind-bending story. What really struck me in the comments was this prediction about where the industry might be heading. Some folks think we're going to see a shift away from these centralized AI giants toward distributed inference using open-source models. Imagine warehouses full of consumer DPUs running llama variants, undercutting the big players on price. It's a compelling vision, though whether it's realistic given the current trajectory, that's another question entirely. The optimist in the thread had an interesting take too. All this massive infrastructure investment, the power requirements, the cooling needs, it might actually drive innovation in renewable energy and power generation. When you're burning through enough electricity to power small cities just to answer chat queries, suddenly investing in fusion research doesn't seem so crazy anymore. Look, at the end of the day, what we're witnessing is either the birth of the next major computing platform or one of the most spectacular bubbles in tech history. The fact that Anthropic apparently increased their funding target from $5 billion to $13 billion during the round, that could be confidence or it could be opportunism. When there's this much FOMO in the air, it's hard to tell the difference. The community seemed pretty split on this one. 557 points and nearly 600 comments shows people are really grappling with what this means. Are we looking at the next Google or the next pets.com? With numbers this big and growth this fast, the stakes couldn't be higher. Now, let's shift gears completely from billions in AI funding to something that shows the incredible creativity happening at the other end of the spectrum. Individual developers creating magic with just some clever code.
Let's dive into something that caught fire on Hacker News this week, implementing a foil sticker effect. And honestly, this is one of those stories that perfectly captures why I love the web development community. Someone took the time to recreate that holographic, shimmering effect you see on premium stickers and trading cards, but entirely in the browser using Next.js shaders. So here's what's fascinating about this. The developer didn't try to simulate the actual physics of thin film interference, which is what creates those rainbow patterns on real foil. Instead, they basically said, you know what? Let's just fake it. They map the viewing angle directly to color hue, throw in some procedural noise for sparkle, and boom, you've got something that looks incredibly close to the real thing. It's this beautiful example of pragmatic programming, where, look, your users don't care if you're accurately modeling the wavelength interactions of light on metallic surfaces. They care that it looks cool and runs smoothly. The implementation uses vertex deformation and these clever foil flakes, basically random bright patches generated with procedural noise, that simulate those tiny metallic particles you see catching the light on real foil. And when you move your view around, everything shifts and sparkles just like it would on a physical holographic sticker. The whole thing renders in real time, right in your browser, which is just wild when you think about it. What really struck me reading through the 50+ comments is how this sparked everyone's imagination. People are immediately thinking about trading card games. Someone mentioned implementing this for Magic the Gathering cards online, which would be absolutely perfect. Others are sharing their own takes. There's this great comment thread where developers are swapping different shader implementations, including one person who made a CD-ROM diffraction effect. Remember those rainbow patterns on CDs? And another who created a physics-accurate version that actually does simulate the thin film interference. But here's where it gets interesting from a philosophical standpoint. One commenter, Grox, basically said, "Am I the only one who hates these sparkly effects?" And you know what? Fair point. There's definitely a risk of overusing something like this just because we can. It's like when CSS gradients first became widely supported, and suddenly every button on the web looked like it was made of glass. There's also this fascinating meta conversation happening in the comments about AI and attribution. One user brought up how AI systems are probably learning from articles like this without giving credit, which is, that's a whole other conversation about the future of technical writing and knowledge sharing that we could spend an entire episode on. What I love about this story, though, is it represents something bigger. We're seeing the democratization of these premium visual effects that used to be exclusive to physical products or high-budget applications. Any developer can now add this holographic shimmer to their web app, their portfolio, their indie game. The techniques that make collectible cards feel special and valuable, they're open source now, running in JavaScript. And the technical discussion in the comments is pure gold if you're into graphics programming. People are debating Voronoi noise patterns versus other noise generation techniques, talking about integrating phone orientation sensors to make the effect respond to how you're holding your device. One commenter even mentioned using similar techniques for fabric rendering in fashion apps. The consensus seems to be that this hits a sweet spot. It's visually impressive enough to grab attention, but lightweight enough to actually use in production. With 503 points and counting, it's clear this resonated with the community. And I think it's because it combines technical cleverness with immediate practical applications. It's not just a cool demo, it's something you could actually ship tomorrow. And speaking of shipping code and practical applications, let's wrap up with a story that's causing quite the stir about how AI is actually being used in real development workflows. Story 5. A staff engineer's journey with Claude Code. Now, here's something that really caught fire on Hacker News. A staff engineer's journey with Claude Code pulled in nearly 500 points and sparked quite the heated debate. Now, I couldn't actually access the original article from sanity.io, but honestly, the discussion thread itself tells a fascinating story about where we're at with AI coding assistants right now. What's really interesting here is that we're seeing this massive divide in the developer community. The author apparently went all in on using Claude for coding, and I mean really all in. We're talking about spending between $1,000 and $1,500 a month on AI tools. Yeah, you heard that right. Over $1,000 monthly just for AI assistance. And the community reaction? Well, let's just say people had thoughts. One commenter, Murab, is absolutely evangelical about it, claims they've barely written any code since switching to Claude Code, and calls it completely transformative. But then you've got the majority of folks saying, hold up, what are we actually getting for this money? And they're raising some pretty valid concerns. The big issue that keeps coming up is code quality. Multiple developers are reporting that when they let AI write the initial implementation, they're getting these verbose, over-engineered solutions that need to be cut down by like 50%. One person described it perfectly. The AI tends to create these sprawling implementations when a simple, elegant solution would do. It's like, imagine asking someone to make you a sandwich and they build you a 5-course meal with garnishes you didn't ask for. But here's where it gets really interesting. There's this user, Will Temperley, who's completely flipped the script on how to use these tools. Instead of having the AI write code first and then editing it, they write their own code and then use the LLM for reviews and suggestions. Their argument? I know my problem space better than the AI does. And honestly, that's a pretty compelling point. The cost conversation is wild too. People are pointing out that for $1,500 a month, you could literally hire a junior developer in some markets. Others are saying there are way cheaper alternatives that get you 90% of the functionality. Someone called this spending crazy wasteful, and you can feel the frustration coming through the comments. What we're really seeing here is this gap between the marketing hype, AI will 10x your productivity, and the messy reality of actually integrating these tools into professional workflows. Some folks are finding genuine value, especially for boilerplate code and repetitive tasks, but others are discovering that fixing AI-generated code takes more time than just writing it themselves in the first place. The whole discussion really highlights where we are in this AI coding revolution, or evolution, maybe? We're past the initial, wow, it can write code phase, and into the, okay, but is this actually making us better developers phase? And the jury's still very much out on that one. And that's a wrap on yesterday's top stories from Hacker News. What a day, right? We saw developers revolt against framework complexity, watched Google dodge the biggest tech breakup bullet in decades, witnessed AI companies raising GDP-level funding rounds, celebrated individual developers creating magic with shaders, and got a reality check on what AI coding assistants actually mean for working developers. These 5 stories, pulled from the 30 that appeared on Hacker News yesterday, really capture the tensions in tech right now. We're simultaneously dealing with tools that are too complex and tools that might be too simple. We're watching companies with monopolistic power face minimal consequences, while startups raise billions on promises. And we're seeing individual creativity flourish, even as we debate whether AI will replace that very creativity. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's top stories. And remember, these discussions are happening right now on Hacker News, so head over there if you want to join the conversation. Until tomorrow, keep questioning, keep building, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in tech. This has been your Hacker News Daily podcast. Thanks for listening.